Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Thanks for joining me. And I want to welcome all new members to the channel as well as first timers in the chat. So I'm going to start off with an interesting account concerning crawler humanoids. The witness states, I'm a truck driver and we tend to see some of the most beautiful things this great country has to offer. However, in contrast, we see some of the most gruesome, from mangled roadkill to cars and people equally unrecognizable. I will never forget what I saw that night. I was driving at around 3 a.m. along Wyoming's desolate I-80. That's when a thick fog rolled up on me seemingly out of nowhere, and the air was almost electrified. I didn't pay much mind to it at that point. I just slowed down and put on my four ways and just kept trucking. That is until I thought I saw a person staggering away from a vehicle broken down on the shoulder. I was about to stop and call 911 when I saw it. A chunk of flesh fell from his pale face. Then he turned and just stared with those bright red eyes. I was going about 5 miles per hour and quickly got up to 45 miles an hour when I saw another 20 or 30 walking along the interstate, all with those bright red eyes and pale rotting flesh. I didn't dare to stop until I got to Fort Bridger. It was then the fog cleared and I noticed a U.S. Army convoy braking at the truck stop I was at. They then proceeded out in the direction of what a couple of the other truckers told me, or what is known as the Wyoming zombie walkers, as they will walk any given stretch of highway or back road in that state looking for their next human victim. Now, a lot of weird things are out on these roads, and any trucker will tell you if you can stay home at night, do it, because you never know what's around the next corner or waiting just beyond the reach of your lights. So this begs the question, what are these humanoids that people refer to as zombies? Film, television, pop culture are rife with productions centered around these horrific humanoids. There's a long history of zombies in America, but not as pale, rotting corpses walking aimlessly about while searching for victims to feed on. Is this the same as the crawler humanoids? Well, let's get started and explore these mysterious humanoids together.
In a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel was made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. So thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you found interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. Again, I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps. I'll try to get to each one of them after my presentation. So, are the crawler humanoids actual corporeal beings that are manifested by human mind and perceivable by others? Or are we witnessing the nexus of an unknown and monstrous species of humanoid? Approximately a decade ago, an incredible phenomenon began to occur. Internet users in earnest began reporting frightening accounts with emaciated, hairless humanoids that crawled on all fours and occasionally were bipedal. Internet users attempted to equate these entities with characters of Native American mythology, oblivious to the fact that the humanoids in these encounters bore a resemblance to the fictional Rake. A vast number of reliable witnesses claim to have seen these humanoids. The crawler humanoid encounters and sightings that are detailed in this presentation offer varied glimpses into the phenomenon. So in September 2011, a following narrative was forwarded by a friend who owns a security company. The witness is one of his employees who started working for him after serving several tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He states that he worked for the U.S. Army Criminal Investigations, CID, before and during the conflicts. Now, he left the service for unspecified reasons. Now, this account is secondhand, but I believe the witness's sincerity, even though he wishes to remain anonymous. So he states, I was an investigator with CID from 2004 to 2009 and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, most of my work was related to various schemes, bribery, money laundering, theft, etc., by enlisted personnel. Now, in 2005, I was informed that I would be embedded with an Army infantry unit in a mountainous region in northeast Iraq. Once I reached my assigned location, we were briefed on strange activity that occurred in a particular area just a few miles from the Iranian border. Now, we started the investigation by reading reports that came from a few local villagers who stated that people were being hunted in the mountains by an unknown creature. One man told me that the Iranians called it a ghoul. Now, that was GHOOL. He had never seen it, but it was described as a tall man-like creature with long arms and legs who fed on human flesh. Now, I reported the information I gathered to my superiors after returning to the unit HQ. So a few days later, I was ordered to return to the area of the strange activity and investigate further. An infantry squad with a squad leader was assigned to accompany me. The consensus was that it was likely a soldier who left his post, went AWOL, and went batshit crazy and started causing problems. Armed conflict can induce the worst in people to surface. If this was the case, the individual was killing non-combatants, our job would be formidable. So after a few days of surveillance and searching, we had no clue what we were dealing with. If this was indeed a soldier or other civilian man, we'd have seen him or gathered some evidence. I was starting to believe that this was a wild goose chase, but the villagers insisted that there was something hunting them. So one evening, the squad leader and I were going over a report when we were alarmed by a god-awful scream that came from the direction of a mountain pass that we had just searched a few hours before. A few local people who had been outside quickly made their way home. It was obvious that they had heard this scream before. Now, within the hour, the squad and I were slowly entering the pass. It was night, but the moon was very bright, so we were able to see around a bit. We searched the entire area for several hours using night vision and high-intensity lights. We found nothing, not a footprint or remnant from any creature fitting the description. I have always wondered what we heard that night. I have asked a few learned people from of their opinion, but with little satisfaction. Now, there were many strange instances in Iraq that just never made the light of day. I heard of some, but I'm positive most were just filed away. Now, this was a pretty interesting account. There have been humanoid claims by the Persians for almost 900 years. Now, there's a Persian story about Amin and the ghoul and the valley of the angel of death, as well as other folklore. And I do hope that more of the strange phenomena experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan are disclosed at some point. So this next account was forwarded to me in November 2018. It's a third-person description of an incident on an Ontario, Canada farm by the witness's American friend. States, this incident occurred in May 2015 in Dufferin County in Ontario, Canada. A friend of mine recently recounted his strange story to me. This friend owns a few hundred acres of land which he rents to farmers to grow crops. Now, as you can imagine, the area is rather quiet. There's not too many houses or traffic around these back roads. Now, his house was under renovation at the time, so he was staying in a trailer around the back of the property. Nothing but potato fields with old barn poking out from the fields. So one night, he said around 1 a.m., he was woken up by his dogs going nuts, scratching at the trailer door. Now, when he went to let them out, he was surprised to see bright yellow lights behind and inside the nearby barn. Thinking there were trespassers, he let his dogs loose and went to grab his rifle. He said as he was loading it, he heard his dogs go from barking to yelping and whining. They came barreling back into the trailer and proceeded to hide under the table. Now, thinking these people hurt my dogs, he hurt his dogs, he stepped out of the trailer and fired 5 rounds into the air and began yelling as he readied another magazine. He got a response when the lights around the bar grew incredibly bright. He admits that at that point he was pretty freaked out. He said that he stood there for a bit staring at the lights when he noticed 2 beings casually walking across the field towards the barn. Apparently, when he saw them, he was hit with a mixture of confusion and fear. He describes them as humanoid, pale white, tall, and thin, having very small heads in comparison to their bodies. He also notes that they must have been about 6'5" in height, with most of that height being leg length. He stated that they were moving very strangely. Their upper bodies seemed stiff and locked, but their legs moved very fluently, almost bringing their knees to their chest. Understandably, fear overtook him. He took aim and fired 3 rounds at the beings, which just made them completely stop moving. Then he noticed the third one to his left very close, but walking away from his trailer. He turned around, went back inside, and went for his handguns when the light outside vanished. He sat inside his trailer with silent dogs until morning. Now, he didn't check out the barn until 2 days later. He found nothing strange there. No burn marks, no holes, all was normal. And when checking the fields, he also found absolutely nothing. He told me that he was freaked out for a while afterward, but nothing strange has ever happened on the property since then. He also likes to add that not too far from his property is a large piece of military land in the woods. It's completely fenced off with barbed wire and sports nothing but vents sticking out of the ground inside it. Apparently, it's a site used for listening to and broadcasting messages into space. So that's the story. I was curious to find out what other people would think this might be. And I know I didn't say it too well. If there's any questions, I'm sure to ask him and get back to you. So what he did, I did have some questions, and he did provide me with a follow-up. And he tells me, I did ask him quite a bit. Unfortunately, he only saw the two from the side at a distance, and the third was walking with its back turned to him. He said that he couldn't see anything on the two far ones' faces, but the one with its back turned to him appeared to have no ears. He also notes that they had small, rounded, almost cone-shaped heads, apparently small enough to look odd on their already thin bodies. As for human characteristics, from what he could tell, they did not look unhealthy. They were extremely thin and tall, but they did not look unnatural. From what I could tell, they didn't look starving. It just looked right for them. On top of that, he states that they appear to have no hands or feet. Their limbs seem to end in stubs. But that's all I could really get out of him about their appearance. Understandably, he didn't study them all that well. Now, this account caught my eye because of a report I received several years earlier describing similar beings observed in Grand Valley, Ontario, which is also in Dufferin County. I don't know if it's related, but it's an interesting side note. So this next account, the witness states, my house has always been a bit creepy. Growing up, I've had unexplained experiences starting from the time I was 4 and never stopping. Now, I live in rural Kentucky. Now, one of those towns that solely rely on coal and is 5 years behind the rest of the world. In general, the whole town is still covered in thick woods that appear to have not been tampered with for hundreds of years. Now, my house is situated right in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by a lot of woods and even a couple of ponds. That gives you the setting for my home. This is where the real story begins. Growing up, I was never allowed to watch shows such as Ghost Hunters or even movies such as The Exorcist in my house because of the weird activity which goes on there. I'd experienced it from an extremely young age. My mom, who has lived in this house her whole life, had also. However, one night my family made an exception. And we all watched a documentary about Waverly Hills together. Now, at that age, I still slept in the room with my mom due to me being afraid of sleeping in this house. So that night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the feeling of something watching me. I felt extremely uneasy. I rolled over to look around the room, and my eyes locked onto something standing beside my mom. It was extremely tall, but looked as if it had a broken back and couldn't stand up completely. It was slouched over and had extremely pale skin and bones sticking out under the skin everywhere due to how skinny it was. It had long claws hanging from both hands. Its face was sunken in and its eyes were completely black holes. A few greasy hairs were visible on its head. It had no clothes. I was horrified. I rolled over and covered myself head to toe with the blanket. I refused to move or look out the rest of the night, even though I was fully awake. Eventually, my mom finally woke up that morning. She immediately started complaining of her side hurting. She raised her shirt to look and found huge claw marks down her side. There was 3 deep wounds that were extremely inflamed and still bleeding. I felt horrible knowing this thing did that to her while I lay beside her hidden. So a couple months later, I saw the creature again. Although not as horrible as the first experience, I woke up to the creature slouched on the floor on the side of my bed, on my side of the bed. It was watching me sleep. I covered myself up again immediately, but this time got the courage to peek out and found it still looking at me. I'm not sure when it went away because I didn't dare look again. I got chills and my hair stood on end before even seeing it for the first time. It had the feeling of complete evil to it. I'm 18 now and sleep in my room. However, I still live in the same house. My mom still sleeps in the room where I witnessed this creature. Almost nightly, she has nightmares about something watching her. She has nightmares about something hiding in the paintings on her walls or something coming from the ceiling in the room where she sleeps. There's one specific corner of the room where almost every dream seems to originate. Our cats refuse to go in to stay in the room if the door is shut. If anyone has any information about any folklore this related to, please let me know. I'm desperate for any information. So I did talk to the individual, and I mean, you know, all he could do was tell me what he had told me previously. I don't know if it was a crow or humanoid or not, or it was some type of manifestation. But it did seem like it was pretty corporeal, so maybe it was. So in August 2017, I received a report from Pierce County, Missouri that centered around a golem-like being that was seen feeding on a dead horse that it had killed. I lived in a small town in Missouri called Pierce City. I had saved up a good 4 years worth of paychecks and sold my TV to buy a used Suzuki SV650. It was my dream bike. I went and bought it, and my father helped me get it to our house because I wasn't legally able to drive it for a few weeks. I remember when I got home, I put it in our barn and locked the barn because we didn't have a garage. I don't remember why I did it, though it's a very small town and we knew pretty much everyone and are hours away from the nearest the neighbor. I fell asleep by 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. and woke up at 10 or 11 p.m. and woke up at 3 a.m. because I heard a large bang near our barn. I thought it was one of the horses that might have got spooked or something, so I went out to check. I always carry a buck 110 folding blade, and when I got to the barn, it was still locked. There was no windows, besides one way at the time. But it's good 15 feet high, and there wasn't a ladder. I unlocked the barn and walked in, and my new used bike was on the floor. I heard a chewing, crunching noise, so instinctively I grabbed my knife. There was very little light, just enough to reflect the polished metal. I peeked into the pen, and kid you not, there was something squatted over the horse who it had just killed, as it was a healthy animal. And we just took care of it. I've seen wolves eat animals before, and it wasn't like that. This thing looked like it came from the Lord of the Rings, the cave dweller thing, but taller. And I know it was only a couple seconds, but it felt like minutes of me being frozen there. Whatever it was looked at me, and I turned and sprinted back to the house screaming. I swear it chased me. It ran on all fours and screeched like worn brakes on a heavy vehicle. I must have woken my dad as he met me at the door with his gun loaded and fired 2 shots in its direction, and then shoved me inside and shut the door. It seemed scared of the shots, and we later dialed the police, though they found nothing. If you guys live near there and have heard of anything, please tell me. It still haunts me, and I live nowhere near there now. So who knows what he ran into? But a lot of times these accounts I get, people do refer to them looking like the Gollum on Lord of the Rings. So interesting. So this next account, the witness states, I'm a truck driver. I'm heading east on I-80 up through to Illinois. I was heading east on I-80 up through Illinois. I stayed the afternoon in Des Moines, Iowa to get some sleep, got fresh 8 hours of sleep, and had just got back on the road. It was about dusk, and the sun was just about to set. I was driving and saw a figure just ahead of me on I-80. It was right on the side of the road. When I say right on the side of the road, I don't mean in the grass. Its toes were right on the white line. I slowed down a little bit to see what was going on there and maybe avoid it. I got about 50 yards from it and slowed to 50 miles an hour. I could see it clearly since I had my high beams on. It was a man. Well, it looked like a man, about 5'9" or 5'10". He couldn't have been more than 100 pounds soaking wet. And when I got up to him, he looked at me, and I kid you not, he had no eyes, no mouth, and no nostrils. There was no orifice on his face. He was pale white, no hair, no features whatsoever. It looked like a skeleton with bleached white skin. He was just kind of standing there looking right at me. I slowed down. As soon as I saw his face, he looked up to me. Boy, I flipped the hammer down the entire way to Chicago. I never looked back. My blood ran cold. My hair stood up. It was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen in my life. So this next witness states, in 1999, I was working at a state park in Center County, Pennsylvania, and got to know the back areas of it pretty well. Approximately 1 mile from the park on the long old dirt road was a large clearing in the woods, which was cleared for power lines and gas well use. Once you got to that spot, you would have to walk over a long hill until you came to an old abandoned trail. If you followed the trail, it would take you in deep into the forest. So one day I followed it and found that it led to a dilapidated cabin, not a park cabin, not on park cabin records. And it looked like it hadn't been used for many decades. Even though it was daylight, I still got this creepy feeling like I shouldn't be there, and worse, that something was watching every move I made. A few weeks later, while I was off duty, two of my friends and I were just out driving around enjoying the summer night. And since I knew all the back roads, I was taking them on kind of a tour. And none of these roads are off limits or secret, so it wasn't breaking any rules. Now, other than the mysterious cabin, the park hasn't any secrets. About 11 p.m., I came to that familiar clearing, and I mentioned something about the old cabin. Being a brave soul, I talked them into letting me show them the cabin. So I grabbed my flashlight, and we took off down the hill and onto the path that led to the cabin. I took the lead, and we walked halfway with my light flashed on, something on the right side of the path. Almost immediately, I stopped and said, "Did you just see that?" To which they responded, "See what?" As I panned the light back to the right side of the road, I said, "That." There, standing by the tree, was a creature only seen in sci-fi movies. It had grayish olive skin and thin extremities. The calves and forearm muscles were very large, as well as the chest. The face was the strangest thing since it had an oval head, but there was no mouth. It had a nose that was long and thin, but not longer than its chin. The eyes had reddish hues in the light and were very small. I hate to make this reference for fear of questioning my sanity, but the best description was that it looked like what the goons looked like in the Popeye cartoon. He was leaning oddly against the tree. Immediately, everyone wanted to leave, but as we turned, my flashlight went out. My friends told me to quit messing with them and turn the light back on, to which I informed them that I wasn't messing with them and to keep moving now that I was back at the back of the group. I frantically continued to beat on my flashlight, trying to get it to work again. Now, as soon as it came back on, I immediately swiveled back around to shine it behind us. The creature had moved up significantly and now was on the left side. We hurried to the clearing, and once we got back up the hill and to the main road, things got worse. Out of the woods, we had just come through with this high-pitched, blood-curdling screeching noise, which after it started, others started to answer back from the other side of the clearing. Now, the fact that I was a park ranger who has been in the woods all my life and had my degree from Penn State in wildlife management means I've heard a lot of noises in the wild. But I have never heard that sound before, and I know it was any kind of owl, bobcat, bear, bird, porcupine, etc. So several months went by without incident, other than not being able to shake that "I'm watching you" feeling. I was to the point of feeling like I was being stalked. So one night, I went to get something from my truck when I investigated the woods and saw those reddish glowing eyes staring at me in the shadows. I immediately ran into the house and grabbed my biggest knife. I'm not a gun guy. To which my father asked me what I was doing. I told him I was tired of feeling stalked and was going to face this thing. He told me he was coming with me, but all along I knew he never truly believed me or my encounter. So when we got outside, he nonchalantly asked, "Okay, where did you see this thing?" I pointed to the spot in which he directed his flashlight. Much to his disbelief, there it was, and as soon as the light hit, it tore off deep into the woods. My father, an ex-Marine who served proudly during Vietnam, yelled at me to get back into the house with fear. There was real fear in his voice. To this day, it still creeps me out telling this encounter, and my hands shake even while typing while recalling it. Now I'm now in my 30s with a wife, kids, but even now, when I go outside at night, I still feel watched it to the point where I get this strong feeling my wife will let me leave the house without her. Just as a side note, for the first 5 years of our relationship, she too would catch sight of this creature, but mostly as it was going into the shadows. So thank you for your time. Yeah, we got them in Pennsylvania too, so just letting you know. This next account, pretty odd. The witness states, I witnessed a tall, pale-skinned being in my grandparents' yard in Willow Creek, California in 1994. My grandparents, dad's father and stepmother, lived in Willow Creek until their respective passing in the early 2000s. Before then, my dad's sister and I would visit at least once or twice in the summer and sometimes for Thanksgiving or Christmas. We lived in San Jose, California at the time, which is an 8-hour drive away. We loved going hiking in the surrounding forest and playing in the Trinity River. We grew up hearing about Bigfoot. Of course, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film was shot in the area, and the town is Bigfoot tourist heavy. But we were taught to watch out for real mountain lions and bears. I need to explain a bit about my grandparents' house, how it was laid out for some aspect of this story. They had a small 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house set at the corner of 2 streets. The road into the neighborhood off the main road ran along the backyard, and the house ran along the other road off that road. Now, several houses ran on each side of the street, and a house set behind their yard. Chain link fencing, 6 foot tall, went around their backyard, and most neighbors' yards instead of solid wood fencing, so you could see into most yards. Now, from the street and their house, it slopes down into the backyard, and the neighbor's yard was roughly 10 feet in total. Now, their backyard was mostly just grass and weeds with a small semi-growing garden near the neighbor's fence line, and a big oak tree next to and partially over the solarium. They had a raised deck running the length of the back of the house with stairs down into the yard at one end and a solarium off their kitchen on the other end. Inside the house, the kitchen and dining room were immediately next to each other with the living room and the front door next to it. Now, at the back of the living room is a short hall with a master bedroom behind the kitchen, and along the wall with the deck on one side and the bathroom and the guest room along the wall facing the side street on the other. Now, my grandparents, of course, got their master bedroom, but Dad would take the guest room, and my sister and I would sleep in the living room in the winter or in the solarium if it was summer. So the story takes place in mid-August 1994. One last summer trip before school started in a few weeks at the request of my sister for her 9th birthday earlier that month. I was 11 at the time. We left early to get there before dinner, so Dad could nap from the drive a bit while my sister and I went down to the portion of the Trinity River that ran at the very back of the neighborhood. The afternoon and evening went as usual. That night, we went to sleep in the solarium, as was the custom for the summer trips. Now, at some point in the night, I woke up, no real reason, not even to go to the bathroom. I was always done from time to time. Even still, I did what I usually do and stared up the stars and moon, around about half visible. Couldn't tell you if it was waxing or waning. Suddenly, I got an intense feeling of dread that skipped fight or flight to straight freeze or you're dead mode. After some time, most likely just a minute or two, I turned my head to the side and looked at the yard. I had to turn to my side and lift myself a bit to get a better look, but the source of my feeling was impossible to miss. Standing at the bottom of the yard next to the neighbor's fence line stood a tall, skinny creature with skin the color of the moon. It had no hair on its head or anywhere else that I could see. Its eyes were shiny white with reflective quality, but not like the bright light was shining on them right then, just moonlight. Its face had human features, but seemed closer to the face. Its arms were long, but that could be just because it was very tall. The chain link fence came up to its armpits, so it had to be around 7 to 8 foot tall. Not enough to just step over the fencing, but I didn't hear it climb over unless it had been in the yard before I woke up, and I just didn't get the dread feeling until later. Its body had dirty gray-looking rags over its chest and around its hips that covered its crotch. It was looking right at me. I got scared and ducked down into my sleeping bag as far as I could. My sister has always been a heavy sleeper, and I didn't want to wake her up for this anyway. Next thing I hear are heavy steps on the deck coming towards the solarium. There's a wood door with a screen window, not open at the time as far as I can remember. All was quiet for a while, so I peeked out through a small fold of the sleeping bag. Through one of the bottom windows of the solarium next to the door, I saw its pale, large feet. The skin was rough and the toes were gnarled with dirty nails. I curled up, trying not to make a sound or move much. The bag was getting stuffy. Next thing I know, my dad is gently moving me with his foot, asking if I was cold because I was just huddled down into the bag. I looked around kind of disoriented. There was no evidence of that creature from the night before. No marks or footprints or bent fencing. My dad was a huge skeptic of anything paranormal, cryptid, or otherworldly, but I told him anyway. He, of course, blew it off as a dream. My sister, being a deep sleeper, didn't notice anything. I asked my grandparents if they heard or felt the thumping on the deck, which would have been along their bedroom wall. Nope. Both seemed weirded out by my story, and my grandma later privately told me there are a lot of strange things up here. That's why we avoid being out at night. She wouldn't elaborate, though. It's obvious not a classic Bigfoot, but I don't know what it was. I wanted to ask someone from the Hoopa Native Americans up there, but I haven't yet. I've never seen anything like it since. Now, these tall, pale humanoid sightings have been known to take place as an area where Bigfoot and upright canine sightings have occurred. Is there a connection? I don't know, but it's kind of interesting. So this next witness states, on a summer night at the end of July 2008, we were camping while working to sell our wares at a flea market in Huntington, West Virginia. It was hot in the camper, so I got up and walked outside, where I found my nephew sitting and texting on his cell phone. It was about 3 a.m. Deciding to take a walk in the night air, we made our way about 100 yards to the end of the long flea market building and sat down on a concrete slab. The light that was on top of the building illuminated the area where we sat. Now, to our front, there was a big open field, and behind the field, there was a tree line that led to a forest. A large billboard on the highway cast a sliver of light across the ground, but the rest of the field was pitch black. As we sat there chatting, I saw something white about 80 yards away squatted down at the edge of the tree line. I looked at my nephew and asked him if he saw what I was seeing. He said he did, but neither of us could determine what it was. The creature started to emerge from the tree line. It came out about 20 feet, almost crawling to stay close to the ground. When it reached the edge of the sliver of light that was streaming across the field, it paused for a second, never breaking its gaze with us. When it reached the edge of the light, it leaped, elongating its body to move through the light in one movement and land in the darkness on the other side, still maintaining its stare. The time in the light allowed me to see it more clearly. Its body was long and gangly, slender, and pale white. At this point, it was about 10 yards away from us, having cleared half the original distance. It started to inch closer, pausing in a stealthy, curious manner, inching towards us as we sat there shocked and frozen at the sight of it. Now it's about 3 yards away, and it stayed in that position for a longer time. At that point, I had time to take in its features in greater detail. Its stature was 4 to 5 feet tall, very lean and skinny, pale white skin with no hair on the creature at all. It kept itself in a hunched position when still. Its knees folded backward like an animal's hind flank. Its arms were long and skinny, reaching down to the hands, and had very long, thin fingers with claws. It had big, black, almond-shaped eyes, very small, pointy ears that were close to its head. It had very long, pointed, interlocking teeth that were always exposed, and the lips that were so small that they barely showed around the huge teeth. Its nose turned upward like a bat and laid close against its face. Crouched, it slowly walked to the edge light that we were enveloped. Within 2 yards now, it was looking at us, making a low snarling sound as it breathed. That was all I could hear. Over the pounding of my heart, which was now in my throat. It was staring at us and cocking its head from side to side as it was trying to figure out its next move. Now, as we sat there wondering what could have happened next, it sprang into the light and its arms up and the mouth open wide, making crazy screaming, growling sounds running towards us. Coming to within a foot, I leaped to my feet, put my fist up in a defensive posture. It looked as if noticing I was larger than it originally thought. Then it quickly turned and ran away, kicking dirt and gravel up in my face. It was all through the field, and I watched as it ran toward the forest. Then I heard the rustling of the brush as it moved through the woods. And that's it. That's the last I got from the witness. So this next encounter, which is the last encounter, this is probably one of the more stranger ones I've gotten involving these humanoids. The witness states that she encountered a green-eyed crawler humanoid with pale orange-colored hairless skin. The being became aggressive and attacked the van she was driving. And the witness, RJ, contacted me directly in September 2021. Hi, Lon. I saw an old post of yours, and I'm hoping you might have some knowledge to spare. I need help. January this year was a very dark place for me emotionally. My husband and I grew estranged after the loss of our 6-day-old youngest son. For about 2 months, December and January, we were apart as he spiraled with substance abuse to numb the pain. He left town and stayed with his father across state. When he came back into town, we wanted to see each other. So he checked into a hotel in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I drove out to Seams around 7 p.m. when our then 2-year-old son fell asleep. We were staying with my mother during this time, and she offered to watch our little one. I stayed for a few hours. It was very emotional, to say the least. We wanted to reconcile and overcome the tragedy we had faced. Around midnight, I knew I would have to get back to my mother's house in case our son woke up. It was pitch black outside, and my GPS led me down a narrow road. I was eager to get home, and although very overwhelmed, wide awake due to the adrenaline of seeing my husband for the first time after our separation. I crossed over a stream and started going slightly uphill. In the middle of the road was a set of bright green eyes. I instantly slowed down because there are a ton of deer in the area. If there is one deer, there are usually more. I slowly crept up the hill in my minivan, scanning for more eyes, and the figure in the middle of the road scuttled to the right side of the road and stayed perfectly still in position. Scuttled is the only word I can describe the way it moved, honestly. To the right were fields and some trees and brush that lined the perimeter alongside the road. The thing was along with the brush, almost like it was trying to blend in. It was on both its hands and feet. Its arms were unnaturally long and bent at an angle. Its eyes were that reflective green the entire time, and I drove past it with no pupils. I don't think it looked at me directly. After it positioned itself in the brush, it stared past me with a black hole for a mouth, not gaping, but wide open. Since I slowed down quite a bit to prevent me from hitting what I thought was a deer, I got a good look at it. It was about 8 foot tall, but on all fours and crouched. The skin looked like orange bark, like it was trying to camouflage along with the trees. But it was too orange tan. As I crept closer, I saw that it was fleshy, like gross, orangey, swollen, bloody, fleshy. The nose is what stood out the most. It was long and pointy. It almost compared to Pinocchio before he could tell a lie. All the same orangey, fleshy color. I hope that makes sense. I don't know how else to describe it. It happened in seconds. I thought it was a deer. I slowed down as I passed it, and it was not a deer. I kept driving. Almost immediately after I laid my eyes on it, I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Such an horrific sense of dread consumed me, and it almost helped me continue to act rationally and drive the hell away from there. I then heard a knocking and a huge thud coming from inside my van. All the windows were up because it was winter, so there was no logical way something could have suddenly appeared as I was driving. All the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and every instinct I had was telling me to keep staring straight ahead. Do not look behind. Do not look in the rearview mirror, and do not say a word. So I did. I struggled to breathe. I had a huge lump in my throat as I sped down that road, so beyond scared, with every fiber of my being on overdrive telling me to get away from there. The second I turned off the road, that feeling of someone being in the car with me was gone. I looked back and nobody was there. I kept driving and called my husband in hysterics, half sobbing, half laughing out of shock and saying, "I'm not scared. I'd kick its ass," because I had a feeling it thrived off my fear. It was one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced in my life. Now, months have passed since then. My husband and I have since reconciled and have been even stronger since our fallout. We had tried to look more into it, but every time we started to do research, I'd get a sick feeling in my stomach, almost like my body was warning me to leave it be. I tried to ignore it and forget it for the longest time. My husband and I bought a piece of property locally. As we looked at properties, we stayed away from anything big and open with a field because it reminded me too much of that thing. We purchased a heavily wooded lot about 30 miles away from where this experience took place. We are having a custom home built there to our 3-year-old son's needs because our little guy has cerebral palsy. We moved onto the property next week in a camper to oversee construction. But now I'm worried. What if there is another encounter? And I had my little boy with me at the time. What if something bad happens and I lose him? I already lost one son. If anything happened to my oldest, I don't know what I'd do. We began finally really digging into what this thing was. We investigated the thing itself based on its appearance and the location I saw it at. It turns out that field I saw it at was part of a memorial park called Housenick Park. There was a lot of Native American history tied to the area, so we dug more into the local lore. we came across the term skinwalker. That was probably the closest thing we found that resembled the creature. That's what we had been referring to it as, but there were a few things about my encounter and its appearance that makes me hesitate to believe 100% certainty that's what it was. So I did talk to RJ by phone, and I reassured her that it was most likely a one-time encounter. Now, the description is somewhat different than most of these pale humanoid sightings, but I'm convinced it was a crawler humanoid or some type of variation. It wasn't a skinwalker. We don't have skinwalkers around here. And this isn't far from us. This is closer to Philadelphia. So what I did, I asked her if I could put her account in my book, The Meme Humanoids, and I did. And I sent her a book, and we had talked since, and I tried to explain to her what I think it was. I don't know if she even believes me, but yeah, that's a pretty interesting account. So that's the last one. So if you folks have any questions, put them up there. I'm going to thank Paula, who became a new member in Robo 1776 for his 1999 donation. And he asked, do humanoids have paranormal sense and powers? You know, I think these crawler humanoids do. I think they do kind of have a sixth sense about things, or they could pick up on emotions. Are they intuitive? Yeah, it's possible. Is there any paranormal aspects to them? Very possible. I mean, sometimes I talk to people and it seems like they do have the ability to shapeshift at some point, or some of I just cut off for a second. I wonder what's going on. Okay, let's see. Joshua 12:12. I don't know. That's about something. He's asking about evil in his house. I think he's talking to the people. You know, it's a conversation in the chat. Just bear with me, folks. A lot of chat's been pretty busy. I got to scroll through everything quickly. Okay, Jose Sanchez asked, could these pale cryptids have been a byproduct of extraterrestrial DNA experiments that were reported in alleged underground secret bases? I guess anything at this point is possible. I don't know. And I wrote the book, and I've looked into this stuff for almost a decade now, and I still don't know what the hell they are. There's just so many variations of it. Is it something related to some other type of phenomena? It very well could be. Is it an outshoot of another type of being? Very well could be. It's such a strange phenomenon. Even though I wrote that book, I don't really talk about it a whole lot. And this is actually the first video I've done on it. But so many people have asked about it, I decided I'd go ahead and put up there what I have. I have lots of stories. I mean, a lot of them. I mean, you know, even I wrote a book, so it filled a whole book. And I've had more since then. Dag Nabbit, could these pale crawlers, when seen, could they be mistaken for a Wendigo? Well, first of all, I have talked about the Wendigo. The Wendigo are usually people who have some type of mental illness, become cannibalistic, and they basically become nuts. You know, the Wendigo is described in many, are said to be some type of pale humanoid being that, you know, many times it has the antlers like a deer and this and that. And that's just old folklore. The whole real Wendigo phenomena is based on many of the First Nations. and it's part of their culture. But many times it's a human who just goes completely off its rocker, and they turn to cannibalism and a few other odd things. Now, I'm not saying like Deer Man and some of these other things may be related to it, which a lot of people that do see that first thing they say is it's a Wendigo, and that's just not the case. But are these pale humanoids related to that? It very well could be. Dagnabbit. The internet has tried to rename these pale crawlers as rakes. Are they the same cryptids? Well, that whole rake thing that's just an internet meme, just like the Slender Man and all that. I mean, how that name became about. I mean, I don't know. It's an internet thing. They call them flesh gates. They call them all kinds of things. You know, the pale crawler is probably the best description that I have had of it. But it's definitely a phenomenon. People are seeing these things. You know, you can use all kinds of words to describe it, but the rake is basically a made-up name. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a being that's called a rake that's entirely different than this or very similar. But I try to stay away from that rake moniker or even the Fleshgate moniker. You know, when I first started taking reports, I did assimilate those together, but I just stopped doing it way before I even started writing the book. So it's its own thing. But like, you know, if you heard in the stories and if you read my book, there are a lot of variations. Jose Sanchez, when crouched over, have witnessed to be able to actually see what they were eating. Insects, rats, vegetation. They seem to be omnivores, so people have stated that they've seen them eat a whole lot of different things. So, you know, small animals, plants, you know. Now, the case I had with the horse, I don't even know what that was. I don't even know if it was a pale crawler or not. It sounded similar, but they had that golem look to it. But then a lot of people say it looks like the golem. So I don't know. It's still it's a mystery. Jose asked, are Wendigos and rakes related or the same? They may be related. They're not the same. But then again, different people use that moniker to describe them, and you know, and other monikers as well. Paula S. Lon, what cryptid would be your worst nightmare? Upright canine. Yeah, I don't want to deal with one of those things. If I see it from a distance, fine, but I don't want to walk up on the one. They hold their ground, and you know, just by the descriptions I have received over the years, these things are huge. And if pushed, I'm quite sure they could become a real problem, a deadly problem. Amy Crew asks, Duke says rakes are ghouls. Do you agree, Lon? Yeah, I guess that would be a closer description. The ghoul-like cannibal, the undead type of thing. And I think that's the original connotation of the rake, or what it was used as an internet meme. So, yeah, it very well could have been. Anything else, folks? Okay, well, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. And if you did donate, it's truly appreciated. Your support is what makes all this possible. So please like and subscribe and share. And if you have a sighting encounter or a report that you'd like to be considered for the show or for the blog, just write me at launchstricklerfamsofmonsters.com. So if you have suggestions on what you'd like to hear the next time, send it to me. Send it to my email. Send it to my Facebook Messenger. Send it to Facebook, wherever you can get a hold of me. And I'll consider it. So until the next time we meet, please take care and talk to you soon. Take care.